Hello and welcome back to Speed Demon Painting. Today we are taking a look at the Abydos battlefleet set, which was kindly sent to me by Warcradle Studios for review. I have already removed the shrink wrap that came around the box, and as we unsleeve it we can see the contents in this box. Apart from a massive bag of resin, you get an instruction booklet that has the different build instructions both for the big resin flagship and all of the different plastic sprues that come in it. This is something you get in these larger boxes, that you have a complete battle fleet where you get the instructions that are not just online but in print. Now for my set I've decided on the Sabah skimmer, the barrage skimmer, and I will also be making the Mesectet as well. Some of these parts actually come in many small bits, but overall there are some pretty large chunky parts on there as well, which made assembly rather easy. On top of that you get these lovely little Capri tokens that you can glue to the side of your ships, which is completely optional for you to do so. There's an option in the Orbats to have them act as mini SRS launchers, and you can glue those on, which is always nice. I say glue these on, you're probably best to attach them with some blue tack, which is the approach I will be making for most of the weapon systems as well. There are these tiny little pegs on the model itself, and I think I'm going to go and use blue tack on them rather than magnets. What I will be using magnets for, however, is doing all these big chunky bits of resin that you see here. Now the first parts that we're seeing here are the different cranes that you can use for the repair platform ship, and it also comes with a nice platform to attach your crane onto, or if you want to attach your heavy weapons to. So it's nice that that is included on here as well. You do have to be careful though that you cannot magnetize those different cranes, because they're supposed to go on top of the generators of this rather large central piece, so yeah, no magnets involved with that one. However, the other sides will be magnetized. The amount of flashing on the major hull was negligible really. I could even scrape it off with my fingernail, so it went off rather easily. And here we can see all those different generator parts that will be taking those cranes as well. I suggest you don't glue those down and just use a tiny bit of blue tack, because magnets, drilling into them with magnets will destroy that detail if you try to go that route. Now apart from the big major hull, you get all of these smaller bits that can be glued on the back. The first ones are the ones that will be used for both variants that aren't the Tannis control ship. They are marked with a bit of resin that says left and right, although I don't think it's really needed, because you can clearly see the broadsides, and those have to be on the outside of the ship of course, so these small tags to go left and right are not necessarily needed. They snapped off rather easily though. I didn't even have to use my nippers on them, just snapping them off went well, but I can imagine that if you don't want to take that risk, you can use your nippers. They can be changed out for these parts that turn it into the Tannis control ship, where you've got all the Capri tokens that are sat in their bays near the end, and they also have the broadsides that should be pointed outwards on your ship. Now these backs pieces aren't the only parts that are interchangeable. There is a second sprue that can go on there. I've magnetized all of these using 4mm magnets, by the way, and if you want to see a guide on how to do magnetization, I have the Independence Battlefleet set up as well, with a small guide on how I do it. The front bit can also be magnetized, and that little baggie also came with a portal generator which is used on the Tannis build. You just have to snap these off of the sprue gates, and then yeah, you can install a magnet there as well to change these parts out. Either the one with the heavy particle cannon to make the Pharos, I believe, but the Abydos and Tannis use the one without it. Those are not the only resin pieces found in the box though. There are also two of these transparent portal resin bits that come along with it. After all, if you use the Tannis control ship, it has a portal strike ability, so you can launch the SRS tokens a bit further away through any portal you have in game. So these portals that we know from the Topkapi set can also be found in here, and which is probably one of the reasons why this one has 4 plastic sprues rather than the usual 6 for this box size. Although, to be honest, given how much of a big ship Tanis / Abydos is, I can see why they haven't included 6 sprues, because I don't think it'll actually have fit into a medium-sized box set, and I think they had to upgrade to the larger size just to accommodate all of that. You do get a lot of SRS bases in this set as well, which is quite needed, because quite a lot of these different plastic sprues can come with their Kepri Escort tokens, like I said. And yeah, there's 4 of these identical sprues in here, which will be the Egyptian frontline sprues. In total, you can build 1 Mass 2 skimmer, a rather large one, and 1 Mass 1 skimmer, a destroyer type of ship, out of them. On top of that, you can find gun batteries and weapon systems for days on this sprue. I believe I counted 8 etheric lances along with 8 regular rocket batteries on there, and 6 of the regular gun batteries on top of that. So if you're an experienced Sultanate player and you're thinking about upgrading all of those little Temirs you've got, you definitely get enough of these weapons on there. In addition, we have the larger, heavier weapon platforms on there, and what is new is that you can also make D-cannon batteries out of them using these parts here. You get the traditional fronts with the rocket batteries, the heavy rocket batteries, and the particle beamers, but yeah, they can now be made into the more heavy D-cannon variant. In addition, there is a new weapon system that is making its way to the Sultanate, which is the heavy magnetic bombard, which can be found on the Manjet build. In addition, the Sabah cruiser now has this salvo missile launch system, which looks like a very cool ancient ballista system, which is made up of multiple parts. The main hull from the Mass 2 skimmer is one enormously large part, which couples onto 2 possible fronts, one that houses an option for a heavy weapon, or one that has an empty one where you can't mount an additional weapon system on it. That one goes in front of this central platform, which is pretty much used on all the different Mass 2 builds that this sprue can make. Apart from that, there are many different front pieces that you can use for the many different builds, one of which is a platform that launches torpedo tubes that we can see here. This part actually looks slightly different to the renders that are found in the instruction manual, because both torpedo tubes are side by side here, while they're on top of each other as well on this one. You also get an option to mount a lot of smaller weapons, but as you can see, there is this sort of pin and hole system on the etheric lances, making me opt for blue tack rather than magnets, because yeah, that seems a bit finicky to do. I'm not saying it's impossible to do with magnets, but it just seems harder, and perhaps needlessly so. Especially when you consider how easy it is to just use a small blob of blue tack instead. Now, there are many different fronts, like I've mentioned, that you can use on there, but there is also this large Kepri SRS token that can be found in this section, and a couple of parts that are supposed to go on the inside of your different flanks for the different ships that you can use. For instance, these ones here will be used for the Mesektet that I'll be using as well. If you're making these ships, I found that it is quite a bit easier if you glue those together before you start doing anything else. The dry fitting on these different models was absolutely easy. They went together lovely, and they even sort of held together with friction, which is always good news, because that means that your assembly will be quite a bit easier to do so. The dry fitting stage went quite well, even though I do drop some of these parts here as well. It all went together nicely, and I will be using Tamiya thin cement, plastic glue for these, which is something where you can do some dry fitting and then just put a bit of a drop of that plastic cement in there to create a tight bond. On top of that, you will have to decide whether or not you're using the front part for the heavy weapon systems, or using any of the builds that don't have it, such as the Mesektet and the Sabah. The only part that I found slightly more tricky to install was this one, the one with the torpedo tubes, because that one has to be slid underneath. That is not the part that was too tricky, they lined up rather easily. However, the front parts of the insides of the bits sticking out were slightly more tricky to line up with them, because as soon as you glue these different parts into place, you only have a very narrow gap through which that torpedo part can sit. So definitely glue these 2 parts first, just so that they're a bit hardened out, and then you can slide in your torpedo tubes rather easily. Now I've gone ahead and assembled the base for a Mesectet cruiser here. Of course the weapon systems are still missing. I usually paint those next to the ship, I don't glue those on at all. But here's a few side comparisons where you can see. This is a Meru from the for the Empire, excuse me, and these are some of the longer build options that you can make from these cruisers. And as you can see, this ship is slightly shorter, these skimmers, than the other ones, but they are actually quite a bit wider when you compare them side by side. So in terms of length, they are more in line with some of the shorter variants that you can see here, the Gugnir for instance, from the Imperium list, and things like the Osaka from the Empire are also ships that are more in line lengthwise, but none of them can quite match the width of these different ships. This is a Sineus from the Commonwealth, which is quite a short ship that you can get, and yeah, as you can see, it sort of lines up with that one. Now it's all good and well sort of comparing them to different models from within the Dystopian range, but I've also gone and gotten a Warhammer skeleton model just to show people who are not quite familiar with this range just how big these Mass 2 ships are. They are quite easily as long as most Ogre models are from within Warhammer ranges, which is always a nice thing. Now in terms of the Mass ones, these are destroyer type weapons. Again, the weapon systems have not been glued on, but these are quite a fair bit chunkier and bigger than most Mass 1 ships in the game. Compared here with the Tolson class, which is one of the larger Mass 1 ships, they sort of have that same length as those types of destroyers, but are quite a bit beefier in terms of their size. And if you want to see a comparison with that skeleton, these ships are about as long as most of these 28mm models are tall. Now in terms of how they compare to other bigger flagship, the Abydos model itself is pretty much the same size as the Mass 5 Murmansk, so it being Mass 4 is definitely warranted, especially because of its width. Again, the length of it is comparable to most Mass 3 battleships, so it more makes up for in girth compared to length. And there we have it, that is the overview of the Abydos box set. I hope you found the video useful. If you did, make sure you hit the thumbs up and perhaps subscribe to the channel for any future updates. I do hope to have a small update on how I went about painting all of these different ships, because I want to go for a heavy metallic look on them with some white decking and some nice teal metallics on them. I'll hope to see you in the next video. Until then, bye.